You know me, my name is Maria Brown and I work in the Career Development Centre in TU Dublin. So chatting to a couple of our lovely colleagues over here on the right. I know you have to do a quick exit to catch a train, but that's okay. That's fine. Absolutely delighted to welcome our presenters. Deirdre Parker, who is Senior Career Consultant in University College Cork, and Michael MacDonald, who is Careers Manager and Coach, the Smurfit Business School in UCD. Delighted, and thank you guys for coming along. So we stick with the plan. It was 45 minutes, 35 minutes presentation with 10 minutes Q&A at the end. So I think we'll stick with that, even though I know we're just a little bit behind. Just to say before you all finish, Christiane will kill me if I don't get you to put your tags just in the envelope here at the end, at the very, very end. Is that okay? And then last but not least, just to collect lunches. Grab a lunch on the go, which is ready for you at the downstairs just as you came in. So I think without further ado, that is all I have to say for the moment. And over to Deirdre and Michael.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome everyone here today. We're delighted finally to get underway. My name is Michael again. This is my colleague Deirdre down the other end there. We've been running this community of practice on psychometrics for a few years now. 2020, pre-COVID. God knows what happened before COVID. So thank you. We'll try and keep this moving along. So I suppose the purpose of the session is to try and get the viewpoints of the different stakeholders when it comes to psychometrics. And I'm going to ask the panel now to introduce themselves. And hopefully we'll get some good, wonderful, I suppose, content around the questions we prepared. And of course, we put out a survey. We got some very interesting questions back from you. And so we're bringing those to the panel today. At the end, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A. But now I'd like to get the panel to introduce themselves. Maybe Ultan, you want to start down? You're in there.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. So my name is Ultan Sherman. I'm a senior lecturer in UCC in organizational behavior and HR. I'm the program director for the Masters in HR. If any of you want to do it next year, you can. Let me know. We still have 1 or 2 spaces. I was told I'd be on the hard sell. And I'm a chartered psychologist with the Psychological Society of Ireland as well.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name's Claire Lenihan. I'm a senior occupational psychology consultant with Aon. So we provide psychometric assessments to lots of different companies in Ireland. So yeah, my background's in psychology. I did my master's in occupational psychology over in Nottingham, and I've been with Aon about 5 years now.
Hey everyone, so my name is Sinead Darcy. Some of you might know me from my time with Irish Distillers leading the Jemison International Graduate Programme, but handed back my pass yesterday, and I'm now an early career strategist, so I'm going out on my own to actually help more companies. I think one of the feedback I got in Irish Distillers was, we'd love if you could help more people, so I was like, grand, so I'll do my own thing and do that. So I specialise in the strategy behind setting up a graduate programme, reviewing a graduate programme. I do keynote speaking around that space and consultancy work in that space. So very excited to chat to you all today. I have experience in using psychometrics, both in my role in private sector and public sector. So hopefully I can give you some nice insights around that today.
How do I follow that? So hi everyone, my name is Siobhan Scanlon. I'm Early Careers Manager in Musgrave, and I'm here today, and I suppose to speak about the perspective of psychometrics in a graduate recruitment process, our own specifically. And I suppose just to give you some context, we use psychometrics we do verbal, numerical, and also we use a situational judgment questionnaire as the first step in our online process. So I suppose we'll be just talking a bit in terms of how we use them in the recruitment process from that perspective. And yeah, looking forward to hearing all the insights.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm a training graduate here with Musgrave. So I completed the psychometric testing there 2 years ago on Siobhan's Musgrave graduate programme. And I'm a member of Gen Z as well. So I might have some insights into how we feel about doing the psychometric testing.
Thank you very much. I guess, Sinead, you didn't hand back the socks though. I just see the socks are still with us. So Deirdre, would you like to open our questioning today? Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. So welcome everyone. So we got a lot of questions through the survey to the whole community. So it's great that we can record the session and people can access it afterwards. And we'll do our best to get through them in the time that we have. So just opening with the question, the very first question is, how can psychometric testing enhance the recruitment process? And what are the limitations in using them? So basically the pros and cons is that an initial question. Anybody want to take that one?
For ourselves, so for myself, I have worked, like I said, in the private and the public sector. So from yourselves, you would know the use of psychometrics from a student perspective. So sometimes that is used for the students understanding how to prepare for an interview. So that would be, their strengths and their development areas, as opposed to weaknesses. And then also it would be to try and help students to prepare for or understand what career path might suit their strengths. So that's the way you guys are probably using it with your graduates and your students. So then from an employer perspective, we would look at how we would use them for identifying fit. Cultural fit, organizational fit, skills fit for the role, etc. So I worked across telecoms, Ericsson, banking, Ulster Bank, and more recently Irish Distillers. And we would have used psychometrics quite differently across the 3 different industries, because obviously the need of the candidate and the profile of the candidate is very different. So psychometrics is a very powerful tool if used correctly. So in the right situation, at the right phase of the attraction and selection process, or then the onboarding, it can inform on onboarding as well. So for us, we did a 10-year, the reason I suppose I'm here is because I had a coffee with Michael a few weeks ago, and I was letting him know that as part of my kind of handover with Irish Distillers, I did a research piece looking at 10 years of psychometrics and what that told us about millennials, centennials pre-COVID, during COVID and post-COVID, and how their profiles changed. In Irish Distillers, we would have used DISC and a subset of that called PPA, which is personality profiling, because it was a marketing role. So you're not too worried about what degree the people have, is more so what is their aptitude and attitude. So that is typically around personality. So what we would have used it for, we would have used it for, you can use psychometrics, as you would know, for sifting if it's high volume, or for selecting. We would have used in Irish Distillers for selecting. So they would have applied, we would have met them at round 1, then we would have done the psychometric, and that would have informed our interview questions at round 2. Because we knew at that point the strengths of the people, but we wanted to probe their weaknesses, actually, is how we use them around personality profiling. And actually, it didn't stop then with getting the right fit of candidate. So for us, when we looked at the research, we defined, well, what did psychometrics help us with over the last 10 years? And that was fit, yes, but if you have the right fit of person, then you have higher performance and engagement levels. We were sending people abroad to cities like Lagos. So you actually mitigate against risk by having the right people in the right places, because not everybody is a fit for Lagos and the culture that you have to deal with there. And then we would have found that it also helped with onboarding. So if we know the type of people and the profile of people that we are hiring, then we know how to actually adapt our training each year to that. So they're the sure. So there's some of the ways that we would have used them, and the way a lot of companies would use them if used correctly. But then the limitations are, if you're not using the right psychometric test or assessment at the right phase of your attraction, recruitment, and selection, then you're not getting the best results. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Sinead. And just, I suppose, a question now for Claire, and you mentioned it, Sinead. What would be the recommendations with regard to which psychometrics are appropriate for the screening out stage, and which psychometrics would be more appropriate for screening in?
Yeah, so the cognitive ability assessments we would use them, recommend to use them as more of a screen out stage. So use it as a very initial stage, and really what we're trying to do with the assessments is to limit risk. So we're not saying with cognitive ability assessments, so like the verbal reasoning, the numerical reasoning, we're not saying that those assessments will find you the top performers, but rather what we want to do is see who doesn't meet the minimum kind of benchmark in terms of cognitive ability. So we would say to our clients, instead of only bringing through the top 20% of scorers, use it to screen out the bottom third of people, because what you don't want to do is to screen out people with potential. You don't want to lose that top talent. So you know, we find for graduates that you don't necessarily need to have the highest IQ or the best academic achievement to be a good graduate. What's more important is things like pace of learning, ability to adapt to change and be flexible, willingness to learn. So you're just really using the assessments to screen out the people who really don't meet that benchmark or don't fit kind of culturally or value with the organization. So for example, one of our clients, they used to use as their screening tool, they would look at CVs and say that all candidates have to get a minimum of a 2-1 in their undergraduate degree to progress. And then they used to move in psychometric assessments. They got rid of the CV screening. And what they found was that 33% of the graduates that they hired would have been screened out with their previous process. And actually those graduates were performing really well, and their managers all said that they would rehire them again. So it's really you don't want to screen out top potential candidates, just using it to kind of skim off the bottom. And then the personality assessments and the culture fit kind of assessments, they would be used then more for the screening in process later, and to help, as you said, with informing the interviews and seeing where to probe the candidates' weaknesses and things like that.
Thanks, Claire. And just, is there a differentiation between, you know, hiring for work placement students and hiring for graduate hires, maybe hiring for experienced hires? You know, are psychometrics testing and assessments used differently for each cohort? Does anybody want to tell us anything about that?
I'm not sure that much in terms of the interns. My apologies, I've swallowed a lung. Yeah, it's the first time it's happened in a panel discussion, so I do apologize, and apologies for disrupting yours, Sinead. Sorry, I missed some of what was said there, so I apologize if I cover over some of this. So at the moment, we actually don't use psychometrics for interns, but it's something that we are considering. And I suppose the reason we are considering doing it is, I suppose, just we want to open up our interns probably to a wider pool than we are currently. So our interns have evolved probably in the process of selected courses, and probably more by geographically as opposed to necessarily the wider spread. So I think for us, absolutely, we would consider it, but I think there is a point in terms of, as opposed to just looking like the personality aspect or things like that, we're probably evolving in our own way of looking, well, what are the kind of skills that we want to focus on, for example, like logical thinking and those kind of traits that you want to probably focus on, as opposed to the verbals and numericals, which you'd be using currently for the grads. We use them primarily at the moment, but in that space because of the sifting, as you've mentioned already. And to Claire's point, I suppose years ago we would have had that 2-1 criteria. We then removed that, and actually all candidates are now invited to complete those assessments, and it's on that basis that we do progress them. I apologize if I'm going completely off tangent. I'm still processing that perspective. I think there, from an employer perspective, there's absolutely some merit in it, but it has to be one piece of an overall picture. Unless it's really high volume, you have to have some point in time where you say, right, we do need to bring this down to a point where we can start looking at them in a bit more detail. And those psychometrics, when we look at, for the graduate piece, what we do is the verbal and numerical, they have to meet that certain benchmark. We have a situational judgment questionnaire, which is specific to Musgrave. And within that, that gives us a sense in terms of how they may perform in typical situations within our business. We don't use that for screening out at that stage. We looked at the final stage when we're shortlisting for our assessment centres. And at that point, we're then saying, okay, how might they look in terms of performing within our space? But that's taken into account at that stage in terms of their degree background, their assessments, their video interview, their CV, all that then comes into play when we're looking at that shortlisting process. So we don't actually look at a CV until the final stage of the process, which is shortlisting for assessment centres. So apologise if I had got off tangent on that.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about your experience as a candidate, and maybe the benefits as you see them, and maybe tips you might have for other candidates as well?
Yeah, I suppose with the numerical and the verbal reasoning questions, obviously you're going to put your best foot forward, but what I learned from doing a range of different applications in different graduate programs, I was answering them and I knew what companies might think is the right answer. And I thought to myself, this isn't how I would act. This isn't what I would do. Maybe this isn't the place where I want to be. When I was doing Musgrave's one and the situational ones, the way I was answering, I knew it was what I thought was the best case scenario of how I would act in the situation. And then when I was successful into getting to the interview rounds with Musgrave's, the more I started learning about the culture and the role, I knew it was right for me. So I think what's really important to students is not to be given the answer that you think is right. make sure that you're in line with the company and you're just being authentic to yourself. Because I think when we look at our graduate cohort, we're all very different people. We're all very authentic and have different skills and different personalities.
Great, thanks, Hannah. So just moving on to the next topic, which is kind of about the reliability and validity of psychometric assessments. And I'm wondering, in terms of the employers that are represented here, have you conducted research into the validity? In other words, have you looked maybe at the performance of people who've been in the position for a number of years relative to their scores in psychometrics and seen a positive correlation between those two things?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we did a 10-year study from 2012 to 2023 across 2 generations and post-COVID, during and post-COVID. And with DISC, as you'd all know, I'm sure you're very familiar with it, you have your dominance, you have your influencing, your steadiness, and your conscientiousness. And our ideal profile when I was in Irish Distillers, and that's the most recent example, and so I'll use that, would have been that we would look for people with high I, because it was about personality, it was about its marketing, it's the drinks industry, so it was about people who loved people, and they are typically high Is. The next highest point we looked for was actually the D, the dominance, because these were people who were in not 9-to-5 roles. They were out trying to find, they're like entrepreneurs trying to build a brand in the market. So we needed people with drive and ambition, which is typically, you know, a top-line trait of a D. The next highest point we looked for was conscientiousness, because if you're a high D and a high I, then you want to make sure that you still get the job done, you know, because high Is like people and they'll say yes to everything. So you need that bit of a balance with conscientiousness so that they'll actually get the job done. And if they say they'll be at a meeting at 3 o'clock in Grangegorman, they'll actually be there. And then the lowest point for us on the ideal candidate was actually the S, the steadiness, because we wanted people who are very flexible, who could be in Lagos this year and could be in London next year, etc. So not too high on that. So what we looked at over the 10 years was we saw a trend around generations. So millennials were very high D and I, quite low on the S and the C, so very ambitious people who wanted to be CEO within a year of being within the company, if you remember back in those days. Whereas with the Centennial, we saw a shift to the S and the C, massive shift to S and C. And the research on Centennials coming into organizations told us that. So we were kind of prepared for it. We knew that they would want more steadiness. Because of the VUCA world that we all lived in, if you remember that pre-COVID, and then really became VUCA after during COVID, but that they wanted steadiness, they wanted to stay loyal to an employer if the employer gave them what they wanted, etc. So we knew it was coming, and that was going to be a challenge for us, because actually the markets that we were opening up into were markets where we needed people to be more D&I. So what we did then was we upweighted our training with the knowledge of the research and then the actual psychometrics, because the great thing about psychometrics is you have the data to back up what you're actually planning, if used in the correct way, and that's where the power is unlocked. So we then use it to make sure that our onboarding was adapted to that. So for example, if you're a high S and C, then something like, if I take an example of reporting, you're not going to have to worry too much. That person's very KPI driven. They're probably the person in their first week say, when will I get my KPIs? How's my performance managed? And they love reporting, etc. But if you're a high DI, and that's predominant profile that we're seeing coming in, let's say in a cohort in a particular year, then they don't care about reporting. They just want to be out meeting people, making sales, or promoting the brand, creating ads, having the next collaboration with a street artist, whatever it is. So basically, psychometric trusts were really, really important in informing not just placement, but also onboarding. And what we saw was when we got that right, so the DIS, it was like a lazy Z, that's why I'm going like that, then those people, the research showed that they actually progressed quicker into senior roles within FMCG. The majority of them stay within FMCG. The majority of them stay within the drinks part of FMCG. After that, then it became the food part of FMCG. And when we looked at other profiles, like let's say the high S and C, that they tended to leave FMCG. And if they left, they went into an office-based role because they like steadiness and they like compliance. So we definitely saw a correlation over those 10 years, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Have any of you ever, oh, sorry, Sinead,
No, sorry, I was just going to say we're probably slightly different, not slightly different, very different, in the sense that we use it from a sifting basis. And because we use it on a sifting basis, I suppose we did look back at one stage to say, okay, is there any correlation in terms of the numerical ability and the verbal ability within that? And we have gone below the kind of recommended threshold on occasion, depending on whether or not the person had maybe done an internship with us and we knew how that person worked, or there are some exceptions we have made within that. And I suppose we didn't necessarily see strong correlations in terms of people's performance on that basis. But I suppose from our perspective, we take a view. You have to have some kind of a cutoff at that stage when you're talking about volume recruitment. So we recruit for typically kind of 10 to 15 graduates a year. We've had over 2,000 applications. So to be able to get through that point, then you do need to bring it down. But then it comes to the point of, for your candidates, trying to give them the sense, okay, well, do prepare as well as you can to do those assessments on that day. But it is going to be a point of view in terms of how they approach that on the day in terms of their performance. Because you'll see it coming through. Some people who are obviously highly intelligent, going through and getting first class honours and masters in all these areas and scoring really low in terms of a verbal assessment. And that's just an indicator in terms of, were they distracted? Did they give it the time? So it's not going to be necessarily an indicator, but unfortunately we have to have some kind of a step in place. So I suppose what we would have seen in terms of people who make it through to the assessment centre stage are probably those students who are more focused in terms of the type of industry that they want to work in, understanding the company they want to work in as well, for the most part, where they've gone and they've given the commitment to be able to work through those stages. So I suppose just there are many, it's a very broad area in terms of psychometrics, and I suppose you've heard two very different approaches within that. So I say if you score below the threshold, for example, in numerical, and you get in, we're not saying, okay, that person did really poorly, we have to really upgrade them in terms of that aspect. It's really based on their individual performance when they come to the business, and then customize the development for them as needed. If they are going to a really commercial role, then what supports they need to be able to get in there. So it's a combination of different elements as they go through the selection process, but also in terms of how they are once they get into the business and how they perform.
Yeah, Alton.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So before I left this morning, my wife said to me, "Don't be boring, please." So I've been studying individual differences for about 20 years. So the question on reliability and validity is a really important question, because up until about 1990, psychometric testing was weak, wasn't particularly scientific. In terms of personality testing, all that changed about 1990 with the emergence of the Big Five model. I won't go into too much detail, but it's a really important question, the reliability and validity, because there's lots of products available in the market. Some are good, some are useless, some are okay. But if you are going to be practicing, or if you are going to use it in your own company, you have to make sure, Claire will tell you as well, you have to use scientifically proven, reliable and valid measures of whatever it is you're measuring. So like what I would say that in terms of the psychometric testing is a tool to allow a company to predict performance of work. Right, just the way a CV is, an interview is, references are. We're trying to make a decision about a person. The single most powerful tool we have available to us in terms of predicting behavior at work is intelligence testing. It's the single most powerful thing we have. It's not perfect. It's not destiny. That's a really important thing as well. Psychometric testing isn't destiny. There's always, exceptions and things like that. But intelligence testing is the single most important thing we have. And after that, then you can look into specific personality traits, like conscientiousness is a very, very powerful predictor of performance. But as everyone else in the panel said as well, there's lots of other factors at play as well, in terms of, like, you could be highly intelligent, you could have good cultural fit, have the right personality, but you can have a very poor relationship with your supervisor. You might get support from your colleagues. There could be stuff happening in your personal life. All these things impact performance at work. So that's a really important question, I think, in terms of reliability and validity. So psychometrics is really helpful, but it's limited. Like every other tool that we use, like CVs, interviews, they're limited as well. So I think that's a useful starting point to ask about reliability and validity. Yeah.
Thanks, Alton. Yeah.
I think I'm handing over to you now.
Yeah. Just, I suppose, not to let you away there too quickly. Are there roles where psychometrics are not applicable?
So yeah, I think so. So there's different types of psychometric testing. Obviously, there's personality testing. Sorry, yeah, you're fine. So there's like personality testing, but obviously there's cognitive ability testing, or intelligence testing as we call it. So cognitive ability testing is only useful when the job has an intellectual requirement. For example, if your job is to build a rocket to go, you have to be very, very intelligent to do that. If your job is smashing rocks or lifting a heavy box, and lots of people do that, and there's nothing wrong with that work, you don't need to use psychometric testing to determine whether that person is a fit. You need to be physically strong and available. So those jobs where there's an intellectual component involved, then cognitive ability testing is very, very useful. But then there are also jobs then where certain personalities might fit with particular industries, with particular organizations, with particular teams within a single organization. So there's so many factors at play in terms of trying to predict performance that it's hard to say conclusively one way or the other. But you are right, some jobs don't lend themselves to the need for psychometric testing.
And just, I suppose, just to finish out that then, in terms of differences, what generational differences do you see? Ultan, what's your opinion on that? Because I know Sinead had her opinion a few minutes ago.
So it's interesting. So again, the research on generational differences, and if you don't research or any reading on this yourselves, the research on generational differences at work is overstated. The evidence for differences between generations isn't as strong as we think it is. So we'd say, oh, Generation Z are very, very different to millennials. Well, actually, the research supporting that, or longitudinal data, actually on that, is quite weak. Oftentimes the differences are age differences. Now, I'm not saying that you haven't found generational differences in your companies. Be so arrogant to be to say that you didn't find them, but and oftentimes there can be differences between a certain cohort. It might be down to the generation. It could be how they're socialized. It could be down to their own particular expectations. So there's so many factors to play to say conclusively. But just my general view on generational differences, it's often age differences. But I wouldn't say categorically that generational differences don't count. Of course, it might be the case. Yeah,
I suppose there are different perspectives, and employers will have, their experiences and what they've seen their I suppose their teams and how they've developed over time.
But even in my job, I've noticed a difference between recent students coming into my classroom in compared to students coming in 10 years ago. So it could be me, probably is me, but it might, I don't know, is it because that they're part of a different generation? I don't know what the answer is. Is it just age differences? Have they had different experiences? So it's hard to say. I keep saying conclusively, hard to say conclusively one way or the other.
Very good.
Yeah.
Maybe just add a small point there, because I have a massive passion for generations and the multi-generational workplace. I could talk all day about it. But actually, I was talking to an academic in UCD yesterday, and they said exact same thing. They must have been reading the same paper as you, but the exact same thing. But a very interesting discussion. And actually, where we landed was, it wasn't about generation, it wasn't about ages, it was actually about life stage. Sometimes you meet people in their early 20s and they have an old head and young shoulders. And actually, for them, sometimes they can find it difficult to fit into the box that is centennial, because that's where they might fit because of their age. But actually, what they're looking for and their life stage might be different to their age or their generation. And that's where we landed. It's actually where you are in your life cycle, as opposed to your age and your actual generational set. So yeah, a little bit of research, maybe opportunity in that space.
Thank you. Claire, I just have a question. I suppose another trend we see at the moment is a move and a shift towards psychometrics that are maybe a little bit more fun, so gamified. Tell us a little bit more about how that might operate in your realm.
Yeah, so we offer a few different gamified assessments as well, and we generally see good comparisons between the gamified ones and the more traditional ones. But the key point is that while they're gamified, they still have to be backed with good research and data behind them. So, our gamified assessments will be based on the traditional ones that have all the strong research and data behind them. So they can be great. Like, we see really good completion rates and really good engagement, particularly with younger generations. But yeah, they need to be backed by research and data, and also they need to be relevant. So there's no point in throwing a gamified assessment in because you think candidates might like it if it's actually not measuring something that's relevant to the role that you're hiring for. But yeah, in general, we see good use and completion, and candidates seem to like them.
And is the market there then, as you say, as you engage with your clients, do you see your clients opting for more of these gamified kind of assessments?
Yeah, definitely for the more graduate level roles. We wouldn't get many people wanting to use them for the more senior roles, just because it feels a little bit, just not as appropriate. But yeah, we do see a good market.
It's too much fun, isn't it? It's too much fun, yeah.
Maybe I can add a little bit to that too. So gamification kind of was a trend, like let's say 10 years ago, it was all about gamification, etc. Kind of moved a little bit away from that in a way, but where gamification was really powerful, and again, we talk about psychometrics being powerful in terms of what you use and when you use it, where it was actually very powerful was in the attraction phase, and it was very valuable to candidates. So it helped the employer with their employer brand, because they were helping candidates to enjoy the experience, but it was also the purpose that it did for the candidates and for the employer. The gamification was actually understanding, are they a fit for the role before they spent the time. So it helped to make sure that the candidate understood, okay, I can opt out of the process, which meant then the employer didn't have the high volume of applications, etc. So, you know, it helped the candidate because it was fun. They learned a bit about themselves. It saved them time because they weren't applying for roles that weren't really a fit for them. It saved the employer then time because they weren't getting applications from people who weren't going to be a fit for the role anyway. But actually, when we go into the experienced hires, which we talked about a little bit earlier, you actually don't call it gamification, then you call it situation judgment testing or assessment. And that's used quite broadly at experienced hire level.
Very good. What about disclosures around disability when candidates present for these assessments? Or what would you do? What do you do? Maybe Claire?
So in every invitation email that we would send out to candidates inviting them to complete assessments, we would include a paragraph around if you have any special requirements or you'd like to speak to someone about any accommodations that you may need. Here's like a number or an email to get in touch, and then our support will be trained to talk to people about that, the accommodations they might need, whether that's extra time to complete them, and maybe using a screen reader or having a reader sit beside them to help them with the assessments, because it's really important. You need to level the playing field. Certain people, for example, with dyslexia, it just might take them longer to read questions and get through the content. So we put a line in, but it is up to the candidates to disclose that and reach out themselves. But the supports are there if they need them. Yeah.
Very good. Siobhan, how about Musgrave?
Well, we were so no, but we had
Pass the next question.
No, but it is within every invitation that goes out. We do have that in there, so that candidates are very clear that supports are available to them. I would say it is confidential, so never come to us unless they look to request a special accommodation from an assessment centre perspective if they get to that stage. So certainly there may be candidates requesting it, but it's confidential in terms of the employer. So it's unless the candidate wishes to disclose it, then we don't necessarily get that information. But I would say we have absolutely in the last number of years have a number of graduates hired who would disclose dyslexia and different elements as part of that, but being very successful in terms of coming to our assessment process.
Very good. Coming towards the end now, but there's one or two more questions we'll get through. And I know we're gone over time, but of course we started a bit late. But if you have to leave, of course, feel free. Feedback. Candidates are always given out that they don't get enough feedback. Where do you stand in terms of feedback that's given on a psychometric assessment? Sinead, did you manage that?
So I definitely believe that as employers, if somebody has given their time to, like our application in Jemison, if you're familiar with it, was like a 2-minute video, a written application. So that's quite time intensive. And to get to assessment centre, like there's 3 assessments that they did as well, a lot of prep for that. So if people put in that level of time, then of course they deserve some form of feedback, okay? But employers sometimes don't have the resource or the funding or the mechanism to do that. We work on as well to make sure that we did provide feedback, but it was to candidates who attended assessment. So for those and anybody who applied and wanted feedback, we were happy to have a call with them because that was the most valuable means of communication as opposed to an email. Anybody then who came to assessment centre, all of them got feedback in written form, and then the offer for a phone call as well. It's amazing how few people take up that offer of a phone call. And when an employer says that we're happy to have a call, they mean it. They wouldn't offer unless they actually meant it. So I think, working with students as you do, if an employer opens that door and makes that offer, then if they really want to know, why didn't they get the role or why did they progress, then they should take up the offer of a call. But a feedback on psychometric testing in particular is it's an interesting area, because my view is that if you are to give people a report with no context as to what that report means, and these graduates are not educated in how to read psychometrics, then that's not of value. So when I worked in the bank, we actually gave feedback on psychometrics, but it was one feedback. So whether you got hired or you didn't get hired, you weren't successful, you all got feedback. If you asked for it, the offer was there again, then you got individual feedback on it, and someone sat with you either over the phone or in person and went through the psychometric report with you. Because if you're given that report, and we've all done psychometrics, I'm sure, in this room, if you're given that report without context or training, then it's very difficult. You always look at the negative, and you won't weigh that or balance that out with the positive. And that's where I think when feedback is given about psychometrics in particular, it should be something that's quite individual feedback as opposed to just a report that you're meant to interpret yourself.
Right. Well, it's good to see that at least in some cases, we have employers here who are able to offer it, because I think a lot of students perceive that it's just, they complete the psychometric and that's the last they'll ever hear on it. Ultan, where do you stand on this in terms of feedback? We're talking about recruitment now.
Yeah, I think as if someone's going to make the effort to get to join your company, they've made that investment, then I think it depends on what stage of the recruitment process, I suppose. I think they are entitled to get feedback. I had an interesting case a couple of years ago of a guy who asked me to do psychometric tests with him, who was looking to change career, and he was trying to get preparation and I suppose advice on what area of career what new career he should start. But he did personality profiling and he did cognitive ability testing with me, and when he got the results, when we went through the profile, I could see that he was a bit surprised and he was disappointed with the cognitive ability outcome because they were lower than he thought they were going to be. So, and this is important in terms of context. So I asked him, okay, take me through the profile. When did you do it? When did you do the assessment? So I did it 2 weeks ago when I was watching the Champions League match. So straight away his profile is null and void because he wasn't concentrating. And if you're not concentrating, like any test, like any exam, that will show up in the feedback. And oftentimes someone isn't concentrating. They're doing personality profile and they're distracted and they fill in the answers really quickly. And then there's when they see the profile. Or it's the same with cognitive ability. They could say, well, I was always really good at reasoning, only in the 52nd percintile. So, well, take me through the assessment. Oh, I did it on the bus with the lads, or things like that. So feedback is very, very healthy. When it's going to invest their time to try and get a job with you, if possible, you should certainly offer feedback. It's very helpful, particularly if you can find out something like that the person didn't prepare properly for the actual assessment.
So I suppose it is the professional then who can give that.
Yeah.
That
and it's really important that feedback is given by someone who knows what they're talking about, because the difference between scores on cognitive ability tests and scores on personality tests is a huge difference. So someone has to be trained when they're giving feedback. Yeah.
Very good. All right, we're coming towards the end. I'm going to ask Hannah, who's been successful and through these assessments. What advice would you give to the students of today who are apply for your job?
But I think the important thing when you're looking for a program or what your next is after college is to really don't just mass apply to a load of graduate programs, which I think a lot of students do. Panic when you see your friends all getting onto graduate programs, is to look for companies that you align with. Think to yourself, would I be happy there? Would I be good at the role? And then go ahead with the process. Just be authentic, I think, with yourself. Try not to tell the little white lies that you're very numerical and you're not, and you're applying for an accountant role that you've no interest in. I think it's so important to be honest with yourself, and I was that during the Musgrave process, and I'm really happy in my role. It's kind of what I expected and more from the line of it. But I think it is just that piece of telling students to be authentic, and I suppose it's hard to know what you want when you're coming to the end of college, but know what you don't want.
Thank you. So it's been honest about your responses that will be the payoff in the long run. Yeah, very good. Ultan?
Hannah said something earlier, which is really important, which companies looking for. You be very careful on that, because the personality traits that companies almost always measure is someone is agreeable, where they can get on with people and will put the group ahead of themselves, or whether they're assertive, they put themselves ahead of the group when needed, and people can be very agreeable or very assertive. But sometimes you might say, oh, well, a company is looking for people, but not necessarily. A quick show of hands, let's say cabin crew. So you're working cabin crew 30,000 feet up. Do you need to be agreeable or assertive in that particular role? We'd say agreeable. Assertive, more so than agreeable. But then you're selling, if you're working cabin crew, you're selling the airline to customers to come back if they have a good experience. So I'd say if we had 100 people here from airlines, there wouldn't be agreement on this. So I've done this exercise in my class. Every year we never agree on what the company's actually looking for. So be very careful. It depends. It's very, very hard to predict. And Claire will tell you, it's just answer authentically and truthfully about yourself, as opposed to trying to, this is what I think they want.
Good. So it's that message again about being authentic when we with our students. The best policy is the truth at the end of the day. Yes, Claire?
Yeah, I might just add on that, similar to what you were saying, you get the same, you could have a score cognitive ability assessment and a company would hire you and another company wouldn't. So you don't try to game the assessments because you don't know what the company is looking for. Another thing in a candidates are preparing to take the assessments is to do the preparation. So a lot of test providers will provide practice sites or practice questions before. So do definitely like prepare, make sure that you're familiar with the assessments, the layout, how you're going to navigate them, and the type of questions to be asked. But they're not the type of assessments that you can study for. So don't spend too much time studying, and also make sure that you're not like paying an external third party to practice. It actually isn't going to be anything to do like the real test. So go to test provider and see if they have practice.
And will your test disclose that it's Aon that's providing the test?
They should, yeah. Yeah, ours do anyway. They should, if they ask, yeah. Good. And for all graduates, we would include a link in the email to the practice site that we have. Oh, so don't prepare, but don't study because they're not knowledge-based assessments. And then another thing is to just like believe in yourself. But what we see a lot of the time is graduates would say like they just have this idea in their head that they're not good at maths, so they get sent a numerical reasoning test. They straight away write themselves off, and that will show up in their performance. So, you know, numerical reasoning tests aren't designed to find maths geniuses. They're designed to see if you can look at charts and graphs and get information. So it's not actually maths, but you do see if people go in with a negative point in how they're going to perform, it shows up in their performance. So for people just to like take a step back, believe they can do it, and then a general kind of test taking strategy is just to not spend any too much time on any one question. So if they're struggling, kind of like make a best guess and move on.
Right. So any final tips for people preparing for psychometrics? I'll go to Siobhan.
Yeah, I'm going to say what people have said here. So what Hannah said, be authentic, and to Claire Knowlton's piece in terms of just preparation. In graduate, the vast majority of employers who do these things are really transparent about our selection process. And I say that if you look at our website, for example, we will say this is what's involved in the selection process at each stage. We talk about the online assessments, say this is Aon's practice site, go there, practice. So there's a lot of resources out there for students. And Hannah, if you're loads of different companies, it's going to be more challenging for them to do so. So if they can narrow down kind of the field or the area in which they're interested in working in, that will absolutely make more focused in terms of the applications that they are making, and also more aligned in terms of where they actually want to grow their career. They may not necessarily know the specific area, be it buying, be it marketing, or what that area may look like, but at least if they've got a good sense in terms of the type of the sector, if they know their values and what kind of company that is as well, they align with their own, that gives them more a sense to be more engaged and motivated to actually put the time into the selection process. So really look at the employer resources that are available and just make the most. That would be one of the key elements that I'd say.
We'll move to Q&A. If we've got maybe 2 minutes. Do we have 2 minutes?
We have 3 minutes.
3 minutes. So anybody like to down the back?
If I have students who are asking me about the questions, so for example, if there are 30 questions or 15 questions in different assessments, do they have to finish 100%? Because that's the pressures that they feel under a lot. And I know from my own experience years ago when I was doing assessments that it's not the case. So just to see if that would be the case, or what advice would you give?
Yeah. I guess it depends on different assessments and the way they're scored, but generally they look at both speed and accuracy. So you don't want to rush through it, but be very inaccurate. And the other way, you don't want to spend ages just getting like 5 questions when there was, lots more to be answered. So it's just about that thing. Yeah, don't spend too long on any one question, but you're not trying to get through them all. Like that no one really gets to the end. Like time. It's meant. Yeah, you can tell they're meant to put them under pressure. Like it is meant to feel like a pressurized situation, but rarely see anyone completing all the assessments. And if they do, they're likely not accurate.
Yeah, so 30 questions and someone gets, they attempt all 30 within the time, they write really fast and they get 6 right. How does that compare to someone who only managed to complete 18 but got 17 right? So it's, this person is more accurate, but they are because this person. So it Claire's right. It's speed. It's speed and accuracy are the two things they're looking for.
Next question.
Thank you, and thanks very much for all the information so far. Mine is very quick. It's about bias. Is there a bias, and how does bias go up the tests, the commercial tests, and what that? Excuse me, and how can we mitigate against that if it exists?
Can I just have what do you mean by bias?
Sorry, that the test would be biased towards a particular trait over another one.
I suppose it would depend on what product you're using or what test you're using. For the most part, no. If they're standardized, then they tend to be, I wouldn't say completely bias free, because you can never say it. They are standardized, and there'll be a group of questions, and different people taking the test could be asked different questions, but they're all relative. They're all measuring the same thing. Another way of looking at bias is when someone is trying to present themselves in a biased way. I'm trying to present it as being very conscientious. You have to be slightly careful on that, because a test that I use is called Preview, a trait called social desirability. So are you presenting yourself in an overly positive way, or are you presenting yourself in an overly negative way? So a question often you would see is, please respond to the following statement: I've never been late for a meeting. And the person says, yes, I fully agree with that. But no one in the history of time has never not missed a meeting, right? Or if a person says, I'm always late for a meeting, but no, you're not always late. You've definitely been on time for some meetings. So that gives you an indication, if they answer those types of questions consistently, how or how socially desirable they're being. But if you're going to use a product that isn't valid, that isn't reliable, then it could be biased. The old psychometric testing 60, 70 years ago were often culturally biased in favor of Western cultures, because they often ask questions that only someone from Western Europe would know the answer to, and someone from Asia or Africa or other continents wouldn't know the answer. That's with the improvements in technology and lots of these online, that's slowly eradicating. So I think most of them, we can be safe if they are official products, they tend to be bias free. But Claire might have a different take.
Let's say it's definitely worth, if you're going to use them, looking into, like, ask the test provider for their technical documentation to see all the background and the research and the studies that went into it, because most good test providers do adverse impact studies, so it'll check the test adverse impacts against any particular group, and any good publisher won't then publish the test. It does until that's rectified. So yeah, using assessments that are backed by research and developed with a scientific background, they should be relatively bias free.
Point that you said at the beginning of this discussion that psychometrics used alone more powerful when they're actually complemented by other selection tools like interviews, group work, etc. Actually, with group work, etc., bias can absolutely creep in, no matter how robust your training is of the assessors. And actually, where psychometrics add that value is that they are standardized, and they take away some of that can creep in from the other assessment tools.
One final question.
One over here.
Yeah.
So I work with a lot of like international students where like they're masters well capable in terms of language skills, but do you find that with the psychometric testing, the difference is, I suppose, are you at an advantage being Irish, say, going for roles that use them? Just for your own findings, it'd be just interesting to hear, like, even from the, I suppose, the aspect of it, like they dread it. They come to me and be like, Amy, like, I've done them myself. The word sometimes actually, as a native Irish person, is difficult to get your head around, and you're kind of going, they're dreading it. So they have this instant. Do you think they're at a disadvantage, even if they're fluent, or what would be your kind of?
The recommendation would always be to allow people to do it in their own language, because language definitely has an impact. Like verbal reasoning, you don't be measuring their language, their understanding of English. You actually want to measure their comprehension and things. So if you can, like, don't keep promoting it, like, but we will offer our assessments in like every language. So the recommendation would be
okay with that.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, to measure what the test is actually supposed to be measuring, rather than compounding it with language. We recommend that they compete in their own language.
Perfect. I think we're done. So I'll pass back to our final co-host, Deirdre. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. So, listen, thank you all. You've been so grateful, or we're so grateful that you gave your time so generously today. Your expertise has been just fantastic, and I think a lot of our questions have been answered. Wonderful. We heard as well of the presentation. I hope you all found it useful. I've also got probably material for 5 more sessions going into even more detail. So thank you sincerely for your time. Really, really appreciate it.